Atlas Harbor hung in the dark like a crown of broken glass, a torus of metal and field light encircling a starless emptiness. Countless vessels drifted in precise holding patterns around it, their drive cones muted, their hulls painted with the symbols of old powers that had survived more catastrophes than any one mind could hold. Inside one of its central halls, the Custodial Atlas had convened. The assembly chamber was a column of space the size of a city tower, ringed with tiers of viewing galleries and suspended platforms. Atmosphere pockets, fluid spheres, and contained gas envelopes clung to gravitic bulwarks, each tailored to the needs of whatever species occupied the space within. Translucent screens layered the air, translating wavelengths to colors, pressure waves to sound, ideograms to speech. In the central well, a hololithic model of Kesshara Magna rotated in perfect silence. The world was a soft mottled jewel. Seas the color of burnished copper, continents veined with luminous rivers and silver mountain chains. Near its southern hemisphere, a faint bruise marred the crust, spidering lines of distortion into the surrounding mantle. The Hallow Chasm, the anomaly, had been named. A fracture in the fabric beneath the planet's skin, where dark energy pooled and flexed against the bonds that normally confined it to the deep geometry of space-time. Left unchecked, the fracture would grow. Left unchecked, it could throw filaments of warped reality across light years, destabilizing other worlds. The custodial doctrines had been written in the ashes of earlier failures. They were clear. They were simple. Sterilize the world before it spreads. Melqis floated in a narrow prismatic shell of protective field, suspended above the nearest hard surface. Thrizari bodies were grown crystalline lattices, layered in ordered planes like a living gemstone. Each flicker of internal light carried thought. Each pulse along the facets recorded it. Melqis had devoted centuries to archiving precedent. When the council called, he had come to watch another page be written in the long ledger of necessitated loss. His facets shimmered faintly as he observed the rotating image of Kesshara Magna. Data fed into his interior matrices: population counts, infrastructural webs, energy signatures. 10 billion sentients, spread across cities, habitats, oceanic farms, mountain enclaves. Species diverse, yet unified, under the Kesharan custodial Curia. The bruise where the Hallow Chasm had opened pulsed. Telemetry around it crackled with non-classical distortions. He recorded it all with the detachment of habit. But inside the ordered planes of his mind, there was a faint, sour note. Another necessary end. Another annotation in the doctrine. Near him, suspended in a spherical volume of dense liquid, Veshaa rested on her curled limbs. The Kelmun had long, flexible bodies and multitudes of jointed arms, each lined with delicate fringes that sensed field lines and currents of force as easily as other species felt air on skin. The Shah's sensory fringes fluttered as she watched. "It is a grim symmetry," she projected through the chamber's translator layer. "Our doctrines prevent the spread of anomalies, and yet we repeat the same choice again and again." Melqis's facets rippled. "Symmetry is the price of survival," came another voice, rough and resonant. Rruveth's hard, scaled form stood on a gravitic plate that flexed easily under his weight. The Hassith admiral's armored crest was etched with service lines and tactical laurels. His people had taken it upon themselves, eons ago, to ensure that the sterilization protocols were enforced without hesitation. To them, calculated brutality was an act of guardianship. His slit-pupiled gaze locked on the anomaly's simulation. "We formed the Custodial Atlas to ensure the pattern never changed," he said. "That we never again falter until something worse than a world's death breaks forth." On a distant balcony, where thin air mingled with faint ozone, a human delegation stood under a standard Terran gravity field and temperate climate control. They were new to this chamber, comparatively. Their emblem glowed modestly, a blue-gold spiral, the rough outline of a small ocean-covered world. Envoy Eoin Marco felt the weight of the pressurized silence. He had sat through months of preliminary briefings, learned the cadence of cross-species protocol, listened to accounts of prior anomalies sealed by planetary fire. He understood the stakes. He knew the numbers, but every time his eyes rose to the rotating image of Kesshara Magna, his gut answered those numbers with a stubborn, choking refusal. 10 billion lives. He knew what the human analysts had concluded. He knew how slim the options truly were. He also knew something else, the way his own species would see this, centuries from now, if they simply nodded and acquiesced. At his side, Kazuo Sato stood with his hands clasped behind his back, concealing the tension in his fingers. Taller than Eoin, leaner, with eyes that tracked every illuminated contour of the holographic planet. Like engineering diagrams, he was officially present as an advisor on logistics and containment engineering. Unofficially, his mind was already running through an entirely different problem. How do you move 10 billion bodies? On a platform suspended across from the humans, Talun swayed gently in a cradle of finely controlled low gravity. The Veruli's body was a lattice of chitinous limbs and folded membranes, hung with tiny crystal chimes that responded to shifts in probability densities as much as to air. Her species read patterns in the noise of the universe, the way others read ink on a page. Her inner membranes fluttered as she gazed on the Hallow chasm's flickering representation. Threads of possible futures wove through her senses like trembling skeins of light. She had already seen something the others had not. Near the base of the chamber, suspended in a column of pressurized glowing mist, Gemin's coral-like polyps opened and closed in slow waves. The HFY mediator took in the arguments swirling around, the established rhythms of doctrine, and felt an old disquiet stirring. The Custodial Atlas's presiding node signaled that formal session would begin. The hololithic Kesshara Magna flared, zooming in to show the region of the fracture. Data streams cascaded beside it in dozens of languages. The first to speak was Lian. Though she did so through the human delegation's channel, her voice rendered into standard by the station's systems. She appeared as a small supplementary projection near Eoin. Tall, dark-eyed, with her hair pulled back in a simple knot. An astrophysicist by training and a risk modeler by temperament, she had been seconded to the Atlas's scientific review board as soon as the Hallow chasm's signature had been detected. "The fracture is anchored," she began, her tone flat and careful, "in a depth band approximately 200 kilometers beneath Kesshara Magna's southern mantle. It is not a conventional fault. There is already a swelling of dark energy density in that region." The hologram sliced through planet and mantle, exposing the bruise of the chasm, a lattice of distorted space, shimmering with violet-edged lines. "If left to grow," Lian continued, "our projections show a 99.8% chance of catastrophic containment failure within 12 local years. 1 in 5 of those failure modes include extrusions of highly energetic filaments into nearby space, sufficient to disrupt other star systems. The other modes are localized, but not survivable for the planet itself." Melqis recorded the numbers and layered them over earlier cases. The probabilities were familiar. So was the creeping sense of inevitability that followed. "The sterilization doctrine was designed for exactly such conditions," Rruveth rumbled. "If we strike with sufficient force before the fracture spreads, we can collapse the lattice inward. The cost is high, but known. There is no alternative, with comparable certainty." Talun's chimes trembled faintly. "Nothing that you recognize as certainty," she replied. "But the space of possible paths is larger than your doctrine allows you to see, Hasith." Rruveth's crest plates tightened. He respected the Veruli in the way a soldier respected an unconventional advisor who had been right often enough to matter. But he disliked this kind of talk when a hard decision was needed. The presiding node invited open statements from committed species. Pazil's vaporous form swirled within a pressure globe, currents shifting color as the Nimbrak elder spoke. "We recall Taltha's fall and the Anstral spiral," Pozil said. "In each case, hesitation multiplied ruin. In each case, sentimental attachment to a single world risked a chain of failure. Our position remains clear: containment over compassion, when the two cannot be reconciled." Agreement rose from several delegations as pulses of color, scent, and tone. When the signal came for new voices, all gazes, lenses, and sensory fringes shifted to the human sector. Eoin stepped forward until the scanner field painted his outline. "Honored delegates," he began, feeling the weight of those eyes and lenses and vibrating membranes. We have read your records. We have studied the anomalies you've faced. We understand that without these doctrines, there might be no Custodial Atlas, no coherent galaxy to debate in this hall at all. Melqis noted the ritual acknowledgments. The human envoy had done his homework. But we also see something else in that record, Eoin continued. A pattern. In every case where an anomaly arose on a populated world, the same choice was made. Sterilization, minimal evacuation, if any, cultures written off as necessary losses, entire populations reduced to statistics. He felt rather than saw. Kazuo shift beside him, a subtle encouragement. Perhaps that was necessary when your reach was limited, Eoin said. When you lacked the means to do more than burn a wound closed. But we are not convinced that remains true. Low murmurs spread through the chamber's different mediums. The humans were treading close to blasphemy, in institutional terms. Rruveth's nictitating membranes slid over his eyes. You are new to this hall, human, he said. You have not watched anomaly after anomaly strain our resources for eras. Every sterilization is an admission of failure. Do not insinuate that we are eager for it. I am not, Eoin replied, and meant it. But we cannot accept a world's destruction as a first resort. Our models, Dr. Tesfaye's models, indicate that a mass evacuation is possible within the timeline you've outlined. Melqis flickered. This was new. A mass evacuation? Veshaa asked. Define your scope, human. Everyone we can reach, Eoin said. Not a few hundred elites, not a few thousand cultural curators. The entire planetary population, or as close as we can get. He let that hang there. The idea felt obscene to some in the chamber, laughable to others. 10 billion individuals? Moved, processed, sheltered? It was not that their civilizations lacked the raw technological capacity. It was that no one had ever seriously considered applying it like that, at that speed, in the face of an anomaly. Lian's supplementary image appeared more clearly, accepting a prompt from the presiding node. We have run scenarios, she said. With the current custodial sterilization window, and assuming use of the combined fleets already present in Kesshara Magna's vicinity, we can, Rruveth cut in, scales flushing dark with irritation. There will be no combined mobilization, he said. Our vessels are here to contain, not to ferry refugees. Deploying them as transports would delay the containment action and increase risk. You ask us to jeopardize many worlds for the sake of one. You already jeopardize many worlds, Eoin countered, by assuming that no one can move fast enough to change the choice. We're not asking you to divert your fleets. We are asking you to give us space to act with ours. Talun's chimes tinkled, a soft sound cutting through the building tension. The youngest fire burns brightest, she murmured, not directing her words to any one species. If you give it fuel, it will consume more than you expect. If you smother it, it will still leave ash. Her senses had shown her a tangle of futures. In too many of them, the geometry of the Hallow chasm twisted in ways their equations did not yet describe. In some, nothing they did mattered. In others, a narrow path forked, the probabilities reshaped by acts no one at this meeting expected. That path glowed brightest when the humans refused to accept the default. The presiding node called for formal proposals. Eoin presented humanities. Lian projected models of evacuation corridors, capacity estimates, time graphs. Farah Mendez's work lay under those curves, her attempt to stretch the possible out of the plausible, and Kazuo's engineering diagrams tried to show how each freighter could be turned into multiple lifting bodies. To most of the elder species, it looked like madness. Melqis recorded the proposal, annotated it as human exception attempt in his internal indexing. The Thrazari part of him that catalogued precedent murmured that this sort of thing would be useful as a footnote. Another attempt at defying doctrine, likely to fail. But another, quieter part of his lattice wondered what would happen if it did not. After hours of debate and procedural maneuvering, the outcome was foregone. By a margin wide enough that even the dissenters felt its weight, the Custodial Atlas authorized sterilization of Kesshara Magna at the earliest safe window. It granted a limited delay for heritage extraction and anomaly observation. a period during which sanctioned vessels could remove designated archives, critical personnel, and culturally significant artifacts, publicly. Under the scrutinizing lenses and whispering membranes, humanity bowed to that outcome. "We will not obstruct," Eoin said, the formal phrase tasting like ash. "We will abide by the custodial decision." Those who knew human micro-expressions might have seen the tension in the muscles around his jaw. To most in the chamber, it read as understandable grief, finally constrained by reason. To Zeman, watching with the Eshkai's broad, slow perspective, it looked like something else. Refusal, banked. As the session moved toward adjournment, the human delegation excused itself. Atlas Harbor's corridors were a tangle of species-specific conduits and shared thoroughfares. The human sector was modest compared to the Great Wings reserved for elder civilizations, but it was busy in a way that belied its size. Staffers in plain jumpsuits moved between consoles and conference pods, their faces strained and alert. In a sealed briefing room aboard their docked flagship, Heliofront Wayfarer, the mask fell. Eoin stood before a wall-sized display where Kesshara Magna rotated once more, now highlighted with layers of evacuation routes and timing arcs. "I had to say it," he told the others quietly. "If we had refused outright, they would have cut us out of the process entirely." Dalen Rohit leaned against the far wall, arms folded. He had not spoken much in the council chamber. His role was not diplomacy. His role, more often, involved engines and orders, the middle space where strategies became flight formations and manifest lists. He had the build of a man once accustomed to field work, now carrying the stresses of command in the slope of his shoulders. His dark eyes traced the projected corridors threading from Kesshara Magna to Solace Harbour, and he thought not of abstract numbers, but of lines of people, ships crammed beyond comfort, the thin bulkheads that would stand between them and vacuum. Lian Tesfaye sat at the nearest console, fingers running through models with hollow-eyed precision. "We have one choice," she said. "We either try this knowing it will probably fall short, or we stand aside and watch 10 billion die on schedule. I cannot make myself accept the second path." Kazuo Sato's voice was low but steady. "Farah's capacity curves assume we run every lift capacity we have, ignore safety margins, and push drives harder than any certification allows," he said. "If anything fails catastrophically, we lose not just evacuees, but ships we can't replace in time." Yara Varma, strategist and yeoman of impossible campaigns, had been silent until now. She stepped forward, bringing a hand up to widen one of the time graphs. "They've given us their window," she said. "Standard doctrine. We know when they fire. That's our hard stop." Her finger traced a region between the present and that sharp vertical line where sterilization began. "We build Solace Pillar in that gap," she went on. "We route every surplus hull, every modular frame, every tug that can be turned into a transport. We coordinate with Kesharan infrastructure under the Curia's nose. If we're discovered too early, they'll shut us down. If we hesitate, we'll never get close." Eoin watched the team around him. Most were exhausted, pulled from other assignments and thrust into preparations over frantic days. None of them looked ready. All of them looked resolute. "Then we don't hesitate," he said. "We signed their decision. Publicly, we respect it. Privately, we refuse to let that be the final word." No one argued. They called the operation Solace Pillar, half as a code, half as a promise. A point of strength where none should exist. Far from Atlas Harbour, in a volume of lightly traveled space, Solace Harbour spun around a dim star. It had begun as a modest expansion outpost, a ring of habitation modules grown around a mining hub. Under the pressure of looming necessity, it became something else. Heliofront Wayfarer arrived with the first wave of new modules. Stripped-down habitat cylinders, agricultural frames, water processing units, power spines. Sanjay Al-Najjar watched them arrive with a sinking sense of scale. As habitat director, he had overseen growth projects before. This was not growth. This was triage, rid across an entire orbital. "We're not building a city," he said to Ines Al-Harith. As they walked along an unfinished corridor open to vacuum on one side, the star's faint light glaring off temporary field barriers. "We're building an overcrowded emergency shelter the size of a continent, and we have weeks." Ines nodded, jaw tight. "Then we design everything around that truth," she said. "No illusions. No pretty domes. Just food, air, basic privacy, and enough structure to keep people from tearing each other apart." Her mind was already mapping where to place large communal spaces, where to isolate those likely to lash out, how to set up counseling nodes and grievance channels. Human crises had taught her something the elder species had never quite internalized. People under existential stress did not stay passive. They moved, they fought, they clung to any flicker of hope or scapegoat. Solace Harbour would have to absorb 10 billion flickers. Back at Atlas Harbour, Eoin began the second phase of his work. He petitioned the Custodial Atlas for authorization to conduct heritage extraction from Kesshara Magna. He cited obscure clauses buried in annexes, old cases where limited cultural artifacts had been removed before sterilization. To many delegates, the request seemed almost quaint. Where previous civilizations had shrugged and burned, the humans fussed over archives and representative samples. Gemin watched the process with growing curiosity. It was not that other species had never tried to salvage fragments. They had, but no one had ever made it the center of their response. The HFY mediator reached out to Veshaa in private. "The humans are pushing procedural boundaries," Gemin said, slow pulses of light moving along his coral nodes. "Yet they do so within the rules. For now, what do you make of it?" Veshaa's limbs coiled in her liquid sphere. "I think they believe they can change the outcome," she replied, "and I suspect they are not showing us all their calculations." She did not yet know how right she was. Rruveth agreed to a narrow human corridor to Kesshara Magna's orbit. His conditions were strict: limited tonnage, declared manifests, inspections by Hassith frigates. It was more than he had to allow, in his view. Heritage extraction soothed some consciences and cost little in operational terms. The first human ships descended on Kesshara Magna under the eyes of alien observers. Ines Alhareth stepped off a shuttle ramp into the smog-tinged air of the Aurealis Basin, accompanied by Tadeo Branco and a small cadre of human engineers and medical staff. Heat shimmered off distant manufactories. The sky was a murky bronze, clouds stained by centuries of industry. Waiting for them were representatives of the Kesharan custodial Curia, a cluster of diverse forms bound together by governance rather than biology. Kesshara Magna's sentients were many, shaped by their planet's varied niches. The Curia's spokesperson today was a tall, horned being with iridescent skin and multifaceted eyes. "You come for our museums and ministers," the spokesperson said. Their tones translated into the humans' earpieces. "We have prepared lists of those deemed essential." Ines glanced at Tadeo, then back at the Curia representative. "We are here for your archives," she said, acknowledging the fiction. "And for your people." The Curia's crest flared in shock. "Whom do you mean by people?" they asked. Ines did not look away. "As many as we can move," she replied quietly. "Not just officials, not just those on lists. We are coordinating with your infrastructure chiefs to set up embarkation sites. You may tell your population that we will take as many as will come." For a long moment, there was only the distant roar of industrial exhaust and the hum of the landing pad's field generators. The curious spokesperson's mind flashed through the reports they had received. 10 billion inhabitants. A sterilization order. A limited, tiny window for removal. No precedent for what this human was offering. "They will riot," the spokesperson said finally. "There will be panic, stampedes, conflicts. Our order will collapse, and you cannot possibly make good on this promise." Ines met their multifaceted gaze. "Tell them anyway," she said. "Better chaos with hope than quiet on the way to an unmarked grave." The Curia representative thought of their own family, of children playing in plazas that would soon be gone. Their horned head dipped, slowly. "I will inform them," they said, "and I will hold you to your impossible word." Hidden beneath decommissioned factories, in the unused cavities of once promising arcologies, Human and Kesharan teams began to carve embarkation halls. Kazuo Sato walked through cavernous spaces that had once served as ore processors and assembly lines, running his hand along rusted girders and defunct conveyor rails. These were built to move mass, he said. Good. They'll do it again. He directed crews to cut out entire walls to lay in new docking collars that could receive shuttles 3 and 4 at a time. Gravity cranes that had once lifted engine blocks would now swing modular habitation pods into place. Tadeo Branco took one look at the cramped caverns and started mapping flight paths in his head. He imagined shuttles stacked in tight approach patterns, threading through narrow vertical shafts, loading and unloading on a clockwork schedule. There would be no room for error. In orbit, Skyhome's skeleton began to shimmer into form. Human freighters arrived with prefabricated rings and spokes, sliding them into place around a central core. Robotic arms and suited engineers stitched them together in a ballet of flashing torchlight. Under normal circumstances, a structure of Skyhome's eventual size would take years to finish and years more to outfit. Kazuo and his teams had weeks. "We don't need comfort," he told his crews over the shared channel. "We don't need beauty. We need shelves that hold air and water and heat. Treat every cubic meter like it's more valuable than your own bunk." Skyhome's first habitats came online as bare corridors with wall-hung hammocks and communal sanitary nodes. Agricultural decks were nothing more than layered trays of nutrient gel under harsh spectrum lamps. It was crude. It was efficient. As the days passed, Solace Pillar's machinery spun faster.
Heliofront Wayfarer hung in a high, evasive orbit above Kesshara Magna, coordinating traffic. Convoys of human shuttles dove into the atmosphere, invisible to most alien sensors thanks to carefully timed masking maneuvers. They dropped into the Borealis Basin and other clandestine sites, loaded with food rations, water filters, emergency shelters. They rose again, laden with people. The first waves were timid, uncertain. Many Kesharans did not believe the announcement at first. Why would an off-world civilization offer to take them all when their own council had already conceded the planet's fate? Rumors spread faster than official pronouncements. Some believed the humans intended to harvest organs. Others thought it a cruel psychological experiment. Then they saw their neighbors return with footage of cramped, but real, ship interiors. They saw preachers and petty criminals, engineers and vendors, all boarding the same shuttles. The queues thickened.
Ines walked those lines, accompanied by hastily trained volunteers. She looked into eyes full of suspicion and hope and numb shock. She heard arguments, fights, desperate pleas to cut in line. She saw Kesharan families torn between sending children first or staying together. She responded with rules, compassion, and a ruthless fairness that made her hated and trusted in equal measure. "We will bring more ships," she told them. "You will all have your turn if we can keep the docks clear. Do not clog the access ways. Do not bring more than the allowed mass. We do not have room for all your furniture." "We have room for you." Farah Mendez, back on Heliofront, watched streams of sensor data and updated forecasts hourly. Her algorithms had been trained on human histories of disaster response, earthquakes, floods, wars, migrations. Nothing at this scale. She extrapolated past the limits of her data, testing scenarios against Lian's continually updated anomaly projections. Each time she ran the numbers, the margins shrank. "We're behind," she told Yara one evening. The timed glow of Wayfarer's artificial day cycle casting long shadows around the ops pit. "Unless we somehow double throughput, we'll leave billions when the window closes." Yara did not flinch. "Then we teach the Kesharans to run their own shuttles," she said. "We requisition any hull that can be retrofitted to carry bodies. We stretch Skyhome past safe density. We stop thinking of ships as valuable hardware and think of them as disposable lifeboats." "What about post-evacuation capacity?" Farah asked. "Solace Harbour is already projected to run at stress levels we've never tested. If we take more than it can absorb, alive in hardship is still alive," Yara said. "Dead is not. Optimize for survival first. We'll solve the rest as we go." Farah hesitated, then nodded. Her own stomach knotted at the thought of billions crammed into habitats built for perhaps a tenth of that number. She thought of disease, unrest, cascading failures in resource distribution. She also thought of Kesshara Magna's surface, fissuring under sterilization beams, and the absence of any alternative. Her model shifted. At Atlas Harbour, Melqis traced those shifts. Thrizari acuity focused on anomalies in data. The human tonnage numbers were not aligning with declared manifests. Energy output from their corridor hinted at more frequent transit than officially logged. Skyhome's mass profile grew at a suspicious rate. Melqis did not immediately report these discrepancies. The Thrizari ethic was rooted in observation first, judgment second. He wanted to be sure. He followed the patterns, cross-referenced with Kesharan infrastructure readings, filtered out known decoys. Day by day, a picture emerged. The humans were not lifting a few million chosen representatives. They were lifting at a scale that extrapolated forward, mapped disturbingly close to planetary coverage. He spoke with Veshaa under encrypted channels. They are attempting to move the entire population, he said. Veshaa's limbs splayed in her liquid. That is not possible, she replied reflexively. Our own models, I have run their numbers, Melqis said. It is not safe. It is not reasonable. But it is not strictly impossible. They both knew what this meant. If humanity succeeded, the Custodial Atlas's basic assumptions would be challenged. If humanity failed, they would have poured resources into an effort that could destabilize the sterilization process and still lose the world. Veshaa brought the matter to Rruveth. The Hassith Admiral listened in silence as she laid out the evidence. Heritage extraction has exceeded its mandates, she concluded. They are not lying openly, but their manifests are being stretched. If current trends continue, they will still not reach the entire population, but they will approach a degree of evacuation that no civilization has attempted before. Rruveth's scales darkened. They are undermining the doctrine, he said. They are giving false hope. They risk interfering with our timing. This must stop. Veshaa's fringes fluttered with conflicted currents. Or we must acknowledge that our doctrine could be revised, she said. That other options exist. Rruveth fixed her with a stare. Not in the presence of an anomaly, he growled. Not with the Hallow chasm's filaments pressing against our equations. We cannot indulge experiments when the cost of failure is a chain of ruined worlds. He called a closed session of the Custodial Atlas. Eoin Marco stood again before the gathered delegations, feeling the weight of their anger now added to the earlier gravity of their concern. You have misused the heritage corridor, Rruveth accused, his translated voice booming. Our monitors show that you are lifting hundreds of millions. Your authorized capacity was a small fraction of that. We have maximized the permitted tonnage, Eoin answered evenly. The doctrine's text allows for the extraction of critical, cultural, and demographic assets. The definition of critical is not as narrow as you have historically applied it. Posel's vapors swirled with agitation. You play games with words while a wound in reality grows, the Nimbrak elder said. Your efforts are reckless. There is no precedent. Precedent, Eoin cut in, is how you came to believe that the death of a world is the only responsible option. You fire on living planets because you have never seen a species attempt the alternative at full scale. A susurrus of disapproval swept the chamber. Jemin felt a slow, deep tremor in his own fields. The human was not wrong. Doctrine had become habit. Habit had become unexamined ritual. The presiding node displayed Melqis's compiled report for all to see. Lines of human tonnage, timeline curves, Kesharan infrastructure utilization. You risk destabilizing the containment sequence, Rruveth said. You have lied by omission to this body. If we allow this to continue, the anomaly may spread before we can act. We may be forced to fire sooner and harder. Then fire sooner and harder, Eoin replied, to the collective shock of the hall. Do your duty, but understand this. If you target our ships, you will do it live, in front of everyone watching. You will fire on convoys, carrying children and farmers and laborers. You will see their faces as you erase them, and you will not be able to file that under acceptable loss without the entire galaxy seeing what that term really means. Melqis felt the ripple of that challenge travel through the assembly. The human's threat was not military. It was moral and reputational. It aimed not at hulls, but at the doctrine's legitimacy. Talun's chimes sang softly. "The blade is drawn," she intoned, "but the hand trembles. You have prided yourselves on cold calculus. Now a new variable enters the equation, the gaze of those you protect." Rruveth's crest flared. "We protect them by preventing catastrophe," he snapped. "Not by indulging in grandstanding." "And yet you hesitate," Talun replied. The presiding node called for a vote on whether to interdict human vessels by force. Delegations conferred in tight clusters of light and motion. Pojal argued for decisive action. If they will not stop, we must stop them ourselves. Gemin argued the opposite. The doctrine was never meant to prevent rescue. It was meant to prevent contagion. They are not spreading the anomaly. They are trying to remove vulnerable mass from its path. 41. The doctrine was never meant to prevent rescue. They are trying to remove vulnerable mass from its path. Veshaa found herself poised in between, torn between duty to establish law and a strange admiration for the humans' refusal to surrender. "The doctrine may require amendment," she said finally, "but to punish them now for trying to save lives is troubling." The vote failed to reach consensus. There would be no authorization to fire on human convoys. Rruveth's scales rippled with frustration, but he was bound. "We will move the sterilization window forward," he said. "If we cannot stop them, we will at least not let their recklessness extend our risk. The barrage will commence at the earliest mathematically safe moment." "They may do what they wish, until then, at their own peril." Back aboard Heliofront Wayfarer, Lian Tesfaye stared at the updated anomaly curves, a deep chill settling into her bones. "The Hallow chasm is accelerating," she said. "We knew it could. We didn't want to see the signs. If we do not collapse it soon, containment becomes far less certain." Dalen Rohit stood beside her, looking down at the dense threads of probability. "And if we collapse it sooner, we leave more people behind," he said. "Yes," Lian answered simply. "This is what no one wants to say aloud." He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. "Then we do something no one has done before," he said. "We keep lifting, even after the countdown starts." Lian's head snapped up. "The sterilization pattern is not designed to allow for that," she said. "Those beams will carve through orbit. The energy levels are not uniform," Dalen said. "There will be gaps, timing variances, localized nodes where the pattern funnels more or less power, depending on the chasm's feedback. You can map those. Kazuo can harden some hulls. Tadeo and his pilots can fly the corridors between." Lian's rational mind rebelled at the suggestion. The risk models spiked red. But another part of her, one that had grown up reading about early Terran space programs that had launched on rockets that failed half the time, recognized a familiar impulse. "We might get some ships through," she conceded. "We might also lose many in the attempt. We will lose all of them if we stop," Dalen replied. "Our duty is not to deliver a pristine safety record. It's to save as many lives as we possibly can in the time we have." He left Lian to wrestle with the math and went to find Yara. In the cramped command deck of Heliofront Wayfarer, Yara Varma already had sterilization pattern schematics spread across several displays. Her eyes flicked through them, overlaying potential flight paths. "We thread them," she said once Dalen had outlined his thought. "We ride the start of the barrage like a wave. No one has ever tried to align civilian traffic with a weapon pattern like this. We'll need real-time feedback. Adjustments down to the second." "Can you do it?" Dalen asked. She looked at him, then at the spinning representation of Kesshara Magna, where lines of future fire crisscrossed the atmosphere. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "But if we don't try, I'll be spending the rest of my life imagining the people we didn't even give a chance." The decision made, Solace Pillar shifted into its most desperate phase. Skyhome's capacities were pushed yet again. Sanjay supervised the conversion of maintenance shafts into sleeping stacks, air ducts into temporary bunk rows. Entire vehicle bays were turned into communal kitchens. At Solace Harbour, modules meant for gradual population growth were slammed into place overnight, their systems barely tested before they were filled. "We are one failure away from a chain reaction," one of Sanjay's deputy engineers warned. We have billions of reasons to make sure that failure doesn't happen, Sanjay said. Double up on inspections. Sleep when you can't stand anymore. Then wake up and check again. On the surface of Kesshara Magna, tension boiled over into violence in some regions. Rumors that certain districts were being prioritized sparked protests. Ines diverted precious personnel to conflict de-escalation, knowing that if the docks became war zones, throughput would collapse. She stood between two clashing groups one day, voice amplified by the shuttle bay's comm system. "You think fighting each other will get you on board faster?" she shouted. "It will not. It will slow everything. Every second you spend throwing stones is a second we could have spent moving someone's child to safety." They did not trust her completely. They did not have to. Enough of them grudgingly backed down to keep the line moving. Gemin watched footage of these scenes, captured by station monitors. He felt a strange mixture of sorrow and awe. The elder species had always framed themselves as guardians, calmly making hard choices so that others did not have to. They spoke often of bearing burdens, yet here were humans, new to the galactic stage, shouldering a burden that terrified the old powers, choosing not to kill, but to risk everything in the attempt to save. Tulun sat in her cradle of low gravity and listened to the chimes at her fringes. The web of probabilities had shifted. Threads that had once led almost invariably to Kesshara Magna's lonely destruction now branched more wildly. There were still many paths where failure reigned, where the Hallow chasm tore loose or the sterilization barrage came too soon. But there were also paths where Kesshara Magna burned, and a teeming multitude watched from somewhere far away, crowded and hungry, but alive. The countdown to sterilization began. At Atlas Harbour, a timer appeared in subtle corners of public displays. It ticked down from days to hours, as if it were just another piece of background information. To those who watched closely, it was a heartbeat. On Heliofront Wayfarer, the same countdown glared at the center of the command deck. It was less than 12 hours to zero when the first containment beams powered up in distant orbits. From the surface of Kesshara Magna, they appeared as faint lines of light, like slow meteors hanging motionless in the upper atmosphere. People pointed from rooftops and shuttle windows, fear and grim fascination mingling in their faces. In the Aurealis Basin's main hidden embarkation cavern, the air thrummed with engines and voices. Tadeo Bronco stood at the base of a ramp, helmet under one arm, listening to the distant thunder as early test firings probed the chasm's response. He thought of those beams as scalpels poised above a patient, and of his own shuttles as gurneys racing to clear the theater before the first cut. Heliofront Wayfarer's traffic display bloomed with symbols, shuttles rising, freighters descending, Kesharan craft weaving between them. Yara directed them with clipped orders, her voice steady despite the inversion in her stomach. "Skyhome, this is Wayfarer," she said over a priority link. "Confirm you're ready for final wave transfer." Skyhome's commander responded, voice hoarse, background noise of thousands audible even through filters. "We're over full," he said. "Every corridor is wall to wall, but we can take one more load before we make our last jump to Solace Harbour." "Understood," Yara said. "You'll be the last big asset out. After you jump, we're relying on smaller hulls and direct runs." Outside, the first true sterilization burst struck. High-energy beams lanced into Kesshara Magna's crust at carefully calculated points near the Hallow chasm. Seismic detectors screamed. The planet shuddered. Deep below, the anomaly twisted, compressed, then flared, its geometry fighting the imposed collapse. The sky lit with auroral fire. On the surface, people staggered as the ground bucked. Ines braced against a support strut, calculating ruined roads and shattered rail lines. Some embarkation sites were suddenly unreachable. "We improvise," she told her crews. "Find any airworthy craft. We'll pick up from building tops, clearings, wherever we can land." As sterilization beams continued to plunge into the mantle, Yara's unconventional plan unfolded. Human and Kesharan ships launched not away from the beams, but alongside their gaps. Lian's data streams updated fast, showing regions where released energy had temporarily hollowed out the atmosphere or bent local fields. She calculated safe corridors where radiation levels, while lethal over minutes, could be endured for the seconds it took to cross. "Convoy Sigma," "Adjust heading to 2.7 degrees starboard," she instructed. "You're about to cross a rising front." Dalen Rruveth did not watch from a safe distance. He stood on a trembling platform in Aurealis Basin, helmet sealed, as a last group of evacuees pressed toward the final shuttles. The air reeked of ozone and dust. The distant horizon was no longer smooth. New fault lines cracked it into jagged plains. "Ines," he said over the ground channel. "Status on remaining population in your sectors?" Her voice came back thin and strained. "We've cleared almost everyone who could reach the major hubs," she said. "There are stragglers, remote communities, people who refuse to believe this was happening. We can't get them all, Dalen." He knew that. He had known it from the start. But now, standing in the heat of a dying world, the knowledge felt like acid. "Get as many as you can," he said. "Run until the last possible second." One of the final shuttles roared skyward. Dalen signaled Tadeo. "Your squadron will escort the last lift," he said. "I'll ride up on the second to last and take over from there." Tadeo hesitated. He knew what that meant. "Understood, Captain," he said, voice rough. In the council chamber at Atlas Harbour, the gathered species watched feeds from Kesshara Magna. Real-time images showed cities cracking, seas boiling at their edges, pillars of incandescent gas rising where beams struck. To those who had grown accustomed to thinking in epochs and star clusters, it was strangely intimate to see death on a planetary scale in such close detail. Melqis observed silently, his inner lattice humming with conflicting signals. This was what the doctrine demanded. This was the outcome they had trained themselves to accept as necessary. Yet somewhere in his matrices, the record of humanity's effort glowed like a defect in the crystal, refusing to be smoothed out. Gemin abhorred the sight, not because he thought there was any easy alternative, but because he now knew what else could have been attempted, what else was being attempted in the margins. He watched human convoys streak through curtain fire, their hulls glowing red, their trajectories lined up with narrow clearances between beams. "Madness," Pojol whispered in his own sphere of mist. "Madness and luck. Madness and calculation," Veshaa corrected quietly. "They are not simply throwing themselves at the hazard. They are riding its structure." Talun's chimes rang in affirmation. "There is a new pattern in the noise," she said. "They twist around the blade as it falls. I have never seen such weaving." As the countdown clock edged toward its final hour, the Custodial Atlas authorized the last and most intense phase of the sterilization barrage. The final volley would collapse the Hallow chasm fully, turning Kesshara Magna's core into a tangle of disrupted geometry that would gradually stabilize as inert ruin. The models showed that if the volley's timing were altered significantly, containment could fail. Rruveth stared at the timer with the focused intensity of a veteran commander. His clawed hands flexed on the control slates. They knew the deadline, he told himself. They accepted it when they chose their path. In orbit, Skyhome's bulk rocked under the impact of nearby containment beams. Its hull was not a target, but the energies involved could not be entirely corralled. Alarms blared as small leaks and stress fractures blossomed. "We're at max capacity," the station commander reported to Heliofront Wayfarer. "If we take one more load, we risk structural cascade." "You've already taken your last," Yara replied. "Initiate jump to Solace Harbour. We can't afford to lose you here." Skyhome's drives engaged, folding space around itself. In a flare of displaced starlight, the station vanished. On Solace Harbour's sprawling frame, Sanjay staggered as new mass, and people arrived in a wave that strained docks and reception corridors to their limits. He and his team surged forward, directing evacuees, patching failures, keeping power flowing. "We're past any design tolerances," one of his engineers gasped. "We will set new tolerances," Sanjay said through gritted teeth. Back at Kesshara Magna, the last shuttles rose. Dalen Rruveth rode with a group of evacuees crowded shoulder to shoulder, the shuttle's interior white-hot from the stress of rapid ascent. The pilot fought turbulence from shifting atmospheric layers. Through a small viewport, Dalen saw a continent-sized plate of crust heave upward, then fold in on itself. When they docked with a hastily repurposed freighter in high orbit, Dalen did not stop to rest. He moved through corridors crammed with Kesharans. Offering brief words, steadying a child who had fallen, he made his way to the small command alcove where Nikolai Kirov was monitoring ship positions. "We have one more wave on the surface," Nikolai reported. "A cluster of shuttles in the southern hemisphere. They're stuck behind a new fissure. If they make it to orbit at all, it will be just before the final volley." "Set up an emergency rendezvous point," Dalen said. "Any hull that can still burn propellant will assemble there. We'll consolidate bodies and send what we can through the last safe corridor." Nikolai nodded. He knew what Dalen was not saying. Someone would have to stay behind to manage stragglers and keep the flight lanes clear. Someone somewhere was not going to leave. On the ground, one of the stranded shuttle groups finally cleared a chasm by skimming through a collapsing tunnel left by a partially melted magma channel. They rose toward a sky now webbed with beams of energy. Tadeo Branco's squadron swept down to meet them, his own shuttle already scored with heat streaks. "Keep tight," he told the other pilots. "Do not break formation. We fly the gap together or we don't fly at all." Heliofront Wayfarer's guidance slaved itself to Lian's real-time analysis. "There," she said, highlighting a narrow sliver of space between converging beams. "If they cross this band at exactly the right time, they'll ride a low-density zone caused by the earlier strikes. The radiation dose will still be extreme, but survivable if their shields hold." Yara relayed the vector. On Atlas Harbor's central display, the converging lines of sterilization energy and the rising convoy's path intersected. "Those ships are going to be vaporized," Pogil said, horrified. Rruveth's claws dug into his console. "They chose to disregard the safe window," he said tightly. "We warned them. We." He broke off as the presiding node highlighted a new variable. To guarantee the chasm's collapse, the final volley's timing could be shifted within a narrow margin. As long as the relative phase relationships were preserved, there was a sliver of slack. If he advanced the volley, he would incinerate the convoy and lock in a slightly higher theoretical containment certainty. If he delayed it by a fraction, the convoy had a path, and the containment probability dipped by a small but non-zero amount. Veshaa watched him. "You wanted hard choices," she said, softly, but clearly enough for nearby delegates to hear. "Here is one." The chamber hushed. Rruveth thought of the worlds he had watched die, of the anomalies he had helped seal at terrible cost. He thought of the doctrine that had guided him for so long, carved into his bones in academy and war room: save the many, even at the expense of the few. He looked at the display where the few were suddenly not hundreds, not thousands, but the living representatives of an unimaginable rescue effort. "They broke our rules," he said. "As you have broken your own by considering this delay," Talun's chimes answered. "The pattern has changed. You can cling to the old lines and pretend they still fit, or you can acknowledge that something new has appeared on the board." His crest flared, scales catching the chamber's light. He reached for the timing controls. Outside, above Kesshara Magna, beams of annihilating energy hung poised to lance inward. Rruveth delayed the final volley by a fraction. On Heliofront Wayfarer, Yara's display flickered. "There it is," Lian said sharply. The gap widened. "We have our corridor. Tadeo, you're clear." Yara transmitted. "You have to cross that band before the volley fires. You'll have seconds." Tadeo grinned humorlessly, sweat stinging his eyes. "Copy that," he said. "Convoy, hold formation. On my mark, we burn everything." They hit the boundary of the safe zone just as the first pulses of the final volley began to rise in power. Shields flared. Hulls sang with stress. One shuttle's forward plating cracked, but its structure held. Above them, a freighter waited, patched, overloaded, bristling with improvised docking clamps. Dalen stood on a narrow exterior platform near its docking array, wrapped in a suit, guiding incoming shuttles in with hand signals and short-range beams. He had refused to stay inside. He wanted to see every vessel they managed to grab. One overloaded shuttle lost thrust as it neared. Alarms blared. If it drifted, it would collide with the freighter or slip back into the surge of radiation. "Bring her in manually," Dalen ordered. "Lock tractor beams. Direct them through me." He felt the tug through his suit as the shuttle's mass strained against their grip. He adjusted vector, sweat cooling against his skin despite the heat. The shuttle clanged into a docking ring, latching with a jarring thud. Inside, passengers screamed and then fell into stunned silence. Nikolai's voice crackled over the channel. "Captain, that's the last of them from the surface," he said. "We're beyond any reasonable load. We have to jump." "Agreed," Dalen said. "Tadeo, take the combined convoy and execute emergency transit to Solace Harbour." Tadeo's eyes widened. "Captain, what about you?" he demanded. "I'll stay on this platform," Dalen said, looking out at the chaos of light and debris. "There are still some autonomous tugs and gliders in low orbit. We can nudge them out of harm's way. Clear your path." "You can do that from inside," Tadeo protested. Dalen smiled, an expression no one on the other end could see. "I'd be in the way," he said. "This is my place. Now go. Don't make my decision pointless." For a moment, silence pressed the channel. Tadeo swallowed hard. He thought of arguing, of trying to order his commander back aboard, but he heard something unbendable in Dalen's tone. "Understood," he said quietly. "We'll see you at Solace Harbour." Dalen did not correct him. He watched as the last freighters, shuttles, and makeshift transports swung around, aligning their bows toward the vector Lian and Yara had carved out of the oncoming storm. Tadeo's voice echoed over internal channels, giving the jump count. On Atlas Harbor's display, the convoy symbol cluster approached the critical threshold. Rruveth's claws flexed once more over the controls, but there was nothing he could do now without collapsing his own carefully preserved timing relationships. The choice he had made earlier had set this path. The convoy's drives brightened. In a staggered ripple, they vanished into the compressed twist of jump space, leaving behind only fading ion trails and the echo of their passage. In the fraction of a moment between their departure and the final, greatest wave of sterilization beams, Dalen Rruveth stood alone on the dangling platform. Above him, lines of light converged. Beneath him, Kesshara Magna's crust yawned, magma plumes rising in grotesque slow motion. He thought of Solace Harbour, of cramped corridors filled with voices, of children pressing to viewports to see stars they had never known, of a plaque someone might someday hang in a busy hallway. He thought of the people still down there, those who had refused to leave, those who had never made it to a shuttle. He whispered a wordless apology to them, and a quiet request that, if there was any justice in the way the universe tallied choices, his refusal to abandon the field might count for something. The final volley fired. From orbit, Kesshara Magna's surface convulsed. Girdles of energy carved around the anomaly, collapsing the Hallow chasm inward. Space itself seemed to buckle. The planet's outline distorting as tides no eye could see surged through it. Then, slowly, the light faded. Where a teeming world had once spun, there was now a broken spheroid. Its atmosphere blasted away, its seas boiled, its crust shattered into jagged plates locked around a collapsing wound. The hollow chasm's signature weakened, then stabilized, containment held. To the distant observers who did not know the true scale of the evacuation, it looked much like every other sterilization the Custodial Atlas had conducted. But on Solace Harbour, a different reality unfolded. The first wave of Kesharan evacuees staggered out of airlocks and docking tubes into corridors so crowded that walking became a matter of shuffling inches. Emergency lights flickered over patchwork signage in dozens of languages. The station's internal fields strained to keep up with fluctuating mass distribution. Sanjay stood on an improvised platform overlooking one of the main reception galleries. His voice carried through the station's speakers, cut through the chaos. "You are safe from the anomaly," he told the sea of faces. "We do not have enough of anything, yet space, food, privacy. But we are working around the clock to make that better. There will be order. There will be rations. There will be a chance to build again. We need your patience, your help, and your strength." Ines moved through the crush, directing medical teams to the most fragile, the injured, the children separated from families. She had expected gratitude, or rage, or numbness. What struck her most in those early hours was something else. A fierce, bewildered determination in many of the faces she saw. They had lost their world. but they had not lost each other. Heliofront Wayfarer arrived some hours later, limping, its hull scorched, its crew haggard. Tadeo disembarked and went straight to the operations deck, eyes scanning for a figure he knew he would not find. Yara met his gaze and shook her head. Tadeo closed his eyes, jaw working. Then he nodded once, a small, sharp motion. There would be time to mourn later, he told himself. For now, there was work to do. At Atlas Harbour, Melqis compiled his report. It was not a simple chronicle of another sterilization. It detailed, in precise, unemotional language, the unprecedented scale of the human evacuation, the logistical feats accomplished in impossible timelines, the hazards faced, the political maneuvers that had allowed it. He included the number of evacuees Solace Pillar had managed to carry away, not all 10 billion, but a staggering majority. He included the names of those who had led the effort, human and Kesharan alike. At the very end, without commentary, he added a short note on Dalen Rohit's final actions in orbit. He sent copies to all member species. In the days that followed, the Custodial Atlas was not the same. Some species were appalled. They saw humanity's actions as a dangerous undermining of discipline. They argued that if every world attempted such rescues, anomalies would spread unchecked. Others were chastened. They realized that doctrine had become a crutch, a way to avoid facing the true weight of their choices. If a young civilization with a tiny fraction of their resources could uproot a world, what excuse did they have for never trying? Gemin spoke in plenary, his slow tones carrying gravitas. The sterilization doctrine protected us, he said, but it also blinded us. We thought there was only one way to respond to certain dangers. These newcomers have shown us that our imagination was as limited as our courage.
We must revise both.
Eoin and Marco returned to the council chamber, bearing no formal demands. He stood before the assembly and spoke plainly. When the next anomaly appears, he said, and it will, you may again vote to erase the world that hosts it. You may again recite probabilities and doctrines. We will listen. We will run the numbers. And then we will look at the people on that world and ask ourselves whether we can live with leaving them there. He paused, letting silence press against his words. If the answer is no, he went on, we will build another Solace Pillar. We will do it with or without your sanction, because we have decided that the phrase acceptable loss means something different to us. No one moved to censure him. In some quiet corners, those words were taken as a threat. In others, they were heard as a promise. On Solace Harbour, days blurred into weeks. The overcrowded station groaned under the load. But it did not fail. Kesharan engineers, once used to planetary projects, adapted their skills to cramped corridors and closed-loop systems. They worked beside human technicians, arguing over flow rates and heat budgets, then laughing when a joint solution kept the lights on one more day. Kesharan children clustered around view screens where educational feeds played. Some feeds carried recordings from Atlas Harbour, explaining the broader galaxy. Others showed simple lessons broadcast by human volunteers, how to grow food in limited spaces, how air recyclers worked, how gravity could be tricked with rotation. In a mid-level passageway, where Sanjay had always intended to install decorative windows but had instead strung power conduits, a small plaque appeared one shift. It was simple, etched on a scrap of repurposed hull plating. Dalen Rohit, who refused to leave people, passed it on their way to maintenance shifts, to ration queues, to stolen moments of rest. Some paused to touch it, some did not. But it was there, a quiet, stubborn reminder set into the station's daily flow. Solace Harbour turned slowly around its dim star, a patchwork arc lit by innumerable small lights, each light a cabin or a console where someone worked, slept, argued, planned. Far away, in the records of the Thrizari and Kelmun and Hassith and many others, the Kesshara Magna incident would be catalogued as a successful containment of a major anomaly. In the minds of those who had watched more closely, it would be remembered as something else as well. The moment when a young species with more audacity than sense took the shared rulebook, read it aloud, and then proved that its most terrifying lines were not the only options on the page.